everyone. Welcome to this month's installment of To Catch a Fraudster. I'm Tom Cronkright, one of the co-founders and executive chairman of CertifID, and just really excited to have a special guest with me. These monthly webinars really are meant to bring not only to light the new strategies and techniques around wire fraud, but also what we do within our businesses and our communities to keep people safe. We will be essentially dissecting our 2025 State of Wire Fraud Annual Report. And without further ado, I am absolutely blessed to have Matt O'Neill, who's the co-founder and partner of 50 Consulting. Matt is a former Secret Service leader within their GIOC, which is their Global Investigative Operations Center. And now he helps small to medium-sized businesses work with the government to kind of level up their tech, especially those relating to the takedown and the prevention of transnational organized crime groups in operating on U.S. soil. Matt is a very close friend and advisor to CertifID in real time. So, Matt, I don't want to speak for you if you want any more background. I'm not a background guy, and I know you aren't either, so...
No, it's perfect. Yeah, looking forward to diving into the numbers.
All right, that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's dive into the report. Why real estate, Matt? You had just mentioned prior to going on that you were with a group of cyber leaders that weren't even aware that real estate was an issue as it relates to business email compromise or social engineering or wire fraud. But what's leading to real estate becoming this top target now?
Yeah, I think that there's several factors at play. And so when I gave a presentation here in the DC area, 75, 80 really sophisticated cybersecurity professionals, it was a surprise to them how much real estate was being targeted. But when you think about it as to why, it kind of makes sense from the perspective of a cyber fraudster. The first is the open source information that is available to them to do their due diligence and to understand by the public nature of real estate transactions, whether it's websites like a Zillow, Realtor, all of those kind of things, but then also county records that are publicly available. So you have that, and it's been my experience targeting and investigating and prosecuting identity thieves, basically wire fraudsters, that they do a fair amount of due diligence and their own sort of like building of dossiers on targets. So then therefore they can answer knowledge-based authentication questions, and they can sort of inject their sort of their communications into emails and things like that. So that's the first part, is a lot of the information's out and available. The second is, because of the nature in which real estate is set up in this country, you have a lot of really small shops, mom and pop shops, owner operators that are their job, and there's a lot of empathy towards this, is to sell houses or to help somebody buy houses. It's not to be a cybersecurity professional knowing all of the ins and outs and how to protect your email. Probably don't even know that emails or username password combinations are the most widely sold thing on the internet, or even understanding the importance of multi-factor authentication and using authenticator apps. And because there has not been a standard across sort of the industry, largely because of the bifurcated nature of which the industry leverages different components to get to a sale, it makes it difficult to sort of level up as far as protecting buyers and sellers along the way. And then also the old saying by Willie Sutton, after he was asked, why do you rob banks? It's where the money is. Well, there's a lot of money in real estate, and so therefore that's going to be a lot easier for fraudsters to target, because they're lazy and they would rather go after the larger paydays than sort of small increments that take up a lot of their time.
So information's out there, readily available. We have a fragmented market, not only in brokerage, title, and in lending. We don't have common framework on what cybersecurity success or cybersecurity hygiene looks like or should look like. And then large size of the prize. That's just a perfect makeup. One housekeeping thing that I failed to mention is if you do have a question, put that into the YouTube comments, and we'll be answering those kind of in real time. By the numbers, this was really interesting. So going back to what Matt said, we're at a near all-time high in average existing home price. We're hitting that early 2022 level again. But yet inventory counts are down almost as low as when we hit shelter in place. So we're off by almost 50% from our high in that same period. But yet they continue to post higher and higher aggregate numbers from real estate business email compromise. So you can see a $500 million problem reported through the FBI's most recent IC3. Title agents, almost 2 in 10 sent money to a wrong account last year, and that's according to Alta's most recent crime and wire fraud study. And half of the companies who sent money to the wrong place did so more than once. So this gets to the idea that, I guess no different than a bank analogy, if you have security protocols that are lax, or they ran the play on one company, they'll continue to run the play, we've seen, at an even higher velocity, meaning you have title company A that got hit with a mortgage payoff fraud, and all of a sudden they're hit with 3 or 4 more solicitations into that same brand. Awareness is really interesting, and Matt, I'll ask you a question on this, but we're doing better on the margin, but still it's not acceptable that roughly half or a little more than half of consumers going into the transaction are just simply not aware or adequately aware of the risk of wire fraud. Matt, you spent your career developing a framework to help victims recover funds. Is it similar? I mean, in most victims that we see, they weren't aware. It wasn't oh man, I was aware and then I clearly made a mistake and now I need your help. They just got taken off the field by something that was completely foreign to them. How do you see that?
Yeah, it's because of, I think, the somewhat complicated nature of a real estate transaction. It's when you look at sort of all the other kinds of business email compromise, whether it's CEO impersonation or invoice injection, things like that, those are really targeting businesses, whereas this is targeting individuals. And individuals don't think largely that anybody's looking for them. And most aren't as aware of the fact that emails are very easily compromised. And so as a result, they think that their emails are secure, so then therefore it's a sort of perfect storm of nobody's looking for me. I'm just this average guy buying a house, and also, I'll also add the sort of like dual concern as it relates to this type of transactions is you don't know if the BEC or the compromise is on my side as the buyer or seller, or on my realtor side, or somewhere else along the chain. And so when you're operating in an environment where most of your communications are via email, using web-based email providers, that is just a recipe for disaster, quite frankly.
No, completely agree. Here was a victim in West Virginia, and I think this is a common would be a common summary by a victim, that it just wasn't something that they were thinking about. And when they look back on what happened, they realize, wow, that was really well executed. Like, that is super sophisticated. And just quickly, Matt, I mean, it has grown in sophistication. I mean, this is full-on scale, enterprise level, syndicate or nation state backed. I mean, this is big business. Is that fair?
That is fair. It's also what makes it even more alarming is the barrier to entry has lowered because of things like Gen AI and other sort of like tools that are at the disposal of fraudsters. And when you do have scam factories that are trafficking people in from around the world and basically holding them hostage to commit large amounts of whether it's social engineering type of attacks, this is only going to get worse.
No, I agree. So I want to walk through just some consumer-based feedback. I mean, all of the study centered around recent buyers and sellers from last year, and our sample size nearly doubled from our 2024 study to now the 2025 study. This is one of those, there's a few of them that stood out, but this is one of those where roughly half of consumers essentially self-served or learned about this on their own. And then the other quarter was the real estate agent. I'm in the title industry and I'm also an attorney. So I'm going to lay our two industries out on the floor and say that that's just patently unacceptable. That 2 times out of 10, they're learning it from the title company and the attorney, and they're not learning it, and most often they're learning it from themselves. And what are they learning? That it's an issue? Is it their issue? How does it present itself? If presented, what does success look like? I mean, there's so many gaps when I look at this. When you saw this stat, you got to advance a look at this, Matt, before we published last week. What do you see on this graph?
I see that there are easy wins ahead by even just providing collateral or sort of documentation across all of, because you have multiple opportunities. You do have the real estate agent, you have the title company, or depending on where you are, the attorney and the lenders. They can all do more and provide this information. And it needs to be front and center for them. So the fact, and I agree with you, that I learned about it myself, the question is going to be is, did you learn about wire fraud, or specifically as it relates to real estate? So these numbers, while not wonderful, there's a lot of opportunity to grow, and hopefully over the next year, 2 years, as the attacks continue, as you mentioned, when things are flat and dollar losses remain at an all-time high due to this, that just tells me that they're getting more and more successful, and that will continue to happen. So trying to go to the old adage that cyber is the ultimate team sport, you need all of these different players to continue to drive home the message. It shouldn't just be one of these groups. It should be all of them telling their folks, and then also providing them with tools so they're not sending communications via email. So it's not just, hey, there's a problem in email community, but good luck to you. There has to be more to it. Just notifying of a risk, but then actually actioning something to protect the average person is hopefully going to continue to increase.
No, I completely agree with that. I'm even an advocate for a state mandated disclosure about wire fraud, that anybody representing or even collecting a fee relative to the either agency or loan origination or title premium or closing. I mean, we're federally required to identify lead-based paint. Most states require a seller disclosure that fills a gap between a home inspection, but yet their entire life savings is completely at risk, and they're essentially Googling or going to AI when they see a news article or they hear something in passing about it. And I agree, that should be just flat across the board. All of us are trying to get to them the quickest, but we'll get to the consumer protection piece of it in a minute. When are they educated? And again, it's, during the first meeting, half, but almost 12% is right before closing. And my opinion on this is when the final CD, honestly, pre-CD, pre-closing statement, and certainly final CD, final closing statement, the minute they see final numbers, and you have to assume that somebody is in somebody's email account, it just creates a higher degree of likelihood that somebody's going to get victimized. This was very similar to last year. I had mentioned last year I had the company, this was a blind study. We hired a third party to administer our state of wire fraud data. 1 in 4 were targeted. This is home buyers and sellers. And 1 in 20 became a victim. Matt, does this surprise you at all? It still just seems, I call it lines in the water, right? So they're going down the river in a boat or a tube, and all of a sudden the scammers just line after line after line in the water. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not at all. I mean, because it's from the perspective of the bad actors, for them it is purely a volume play as well. And so you would expect them to be a 1 in 4 targeted. And I would even say that that's probably off a little bit, because how do you even know? That's just that they recognize that they were targeted.
Yeah, fair enough. They could have been targeted and the email filter caught it. They could have been targeted and they're behind on their email. You're exactly right. Yeah. This is interesting because this is think about this, asking home buyers and sellers, where did the solicitation or the suspicious or sketchy communication come from? And we've known this for a while. It's just interesting to see the data. So the real estate agent, by and large, and then title and settlement. So I look at this saying it can come from anywhere. It can come from the seller to the agent that passes on to the title company on a mortgage payoff. It could come from the title company to the real estate agent to the buyer to divert a cash to close payment obligation. Anything stand out here, Matt, other than they'll get in and they'll morph wherever point of access they have?
Yeah, the attack surface is so wide because you can use all of these different avenues, which makes it even more difficult for the person to identify it, because it can come at you from all angles.
Yep. The recovery process, so we could do a whole nother set, and maybe we will later. We'll do another money laundering and how money moves. But you were quoted recently, Matt, that time does matter. Do you see that changing at all one way or another in 2025 versus what we've seen in 24 and 23?
It matters even more, because what folks need to realize is, so going back 5 or 6 years, the bad actors, if they got their money, they would do 1 or 2 domestic hops maybe and then go overseas. But it was all sort of in traditional bank accounts. Now, with the ability to move money into virtual asset service providers, into digital assets, so cryptocurrency, it makes it a lot more difficult for law enforcement to intercede, because you can't use traditional sort of like the financial fraud kill chain from FinCEN as well, because the money is overseas quicker and you can move it across different chains, from and sort of obfuscate where the money wound up sort of at the end, instead of just going from bank to bank to bank. So speed is even more important. And I'd say my guess is over the next couple of years, it won't be 24 hours, it'll be 12 hours, something along those lines.
Because they're moving it, because it always goes from one bank to a bank. That's the start. So that's to get the thing primed up. And then they're going to crypto, then they use tumblers, and then to other crypto wallets, right? Then to fiat transfers overseas. Are you hearing, Matt, real-time payments? Do you think 12 months from now, when we do this update together, hopefully you will, I'll be here. Are we talking about real-time payments? And if so, why? And if not, what's your perspective on that?
No, it's definitely alarming. And in many of like sort of like the neobanks and things like that, like there's AML maturity, or their fraud maturity level isn't what it is at sort of think large GSIB, so globally significant banks. And so when you have 16,000 financial institutions, and then you also have the ability, as you said, of automatic the push payments and sort of real-time payments, bad actors are going to go wherever the good guys, whether that's bank or law enforcement, sets up friction. They're going to go to where there's less friction. And the other concern is there's a whole unregulated space where bad actors are moving money very quickly, that should also, so think fintech, because fintech's not regulated like financial services. So we're seeing a lot of money laundering, and I don't want to go into specifics in case somebody thinks that it's a good idea, not in this, but like in public settings. But we're definitely concerned think about crowdsourcing sites and how easy it is to launder money into a crowdsourcing site, say for donations and things like that, not regulated. And so, yeah, it is a concern.
Yeah, my concern is right now, to prime that that real transfer to the bad actors, it's going from a domestic bank to a domestic bank, typically by wire. If it goes by real-time payment, that settles in less than 2 minutes, and now you're in a crypto wallet, call it minute 2.5 to 3, that time compression, and then we don't have, and that runs on a 24/7 cycle. So now we don't have the luxury of a weekend or the off hours of the Federal Reserve. I see that payment rail to prime as concerning as it relates to recovery. Just quickly, I want to get to the back half of some of these things. Early discovery is absolutely critical. Some required, and I think banks are doing a better job of identifying and notifying folks that are sending money when the money didn't arrive or it looks suspicious, and maybe even the receiving bank as well. Matt, you and I, and you've written on this in DC publicly about the need for information sharing around the Secrecy Act and the Patriot Act. How can we do even better on this?
So and the changing landscape, of course, at the national level as it relates to, regulations and sort of like the enforcement actions is going to be different for the next few years. It's really trying to get financial institutions to understand what their return on investment is when it relates to information sharing in a scalable manner, lawfully using privacy-preserving technology under the safe harbor provision of 314B. So it's going to take a lot more sort of public pressure and dollar losses, unfortunately, for them to see sort of like a material change.
Yeah, my concern here is that essentially 2 in 10 find out that their life savings is gone when they show up for closing. So they're asked for a check. You get the blank stare. Why are you asking me for a check? I wired 3 days ago. I've actually been patched into calls, conference rooms and closing rooms in real time when the closer or the owner they just simply don't know what to say. And it's a moment, it's a life moment for those that have kind of gone through that. But again, I think a lot of work that we need to do there. Recovery process, you can see here, again, that's going to vary depending on speed, time, and speed in which they're moving the money, time in which we're notified and can work with federal law enforcement. Certified has a fraud recovery services division that it established a few years ago, working with the Secret Service as a partner. But again, it's kind of a jump ball. That's what we see. We don't know until you crack the hood and you figure out what's going on. And I think it also plays on the complicit versus the non-complicit account holder on the other end.
Yeah, people, I think, don't understand necessarily generally about the role that money mule networks play. And you're right, whether or not they're witting or unwitting money mules. And how quickly, and also that last slide speaks to me about whether you get it all back or half of it back. It is how they are breaking down that money. Because typically, if they're not breaking it down, meaning you get $500,000 into a bank account, am I sending that $500,000 to 5 other bank accounts at $100,000, or am I taking the whole thing and sending it to a VASP or something like that? In many instances, they try to break it down in order to try to get under some of whatever they believe that the thresholds are for alerting. So how quickly can you get into this process really depends on how much money you get in return.
Yeah, but less than half are going to get it all back.
Yes.
And, more than half, but not all, is 27%, and then none is still 12%. Like you say, it depends on when it's alerted and how quickly folks are acting on your behalf. Where do victims go? They naturally go to the bank. That's a little bit of a jump ball as well, because some of the smaller institutions don't have fraud desks. They've never or are not familiar with a rapid alert, if you will, or protocol to the fraud desk of a receiving bank. Title companies, again, they're the ones identifying that the money didn't land in the escrow account or the mortgage wasn't paid off. But how equipped are they to provide that level of service? And law enforcement is just simply overwhelmed. I mean, there's just so many things going on. And as much as we heavily depend on them, they just can't get to can't get to everything. The reporting piece of it, everything should be reported through the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's ic3.gov, but still over 2 in 10 go unreported, either for fear of a lot of things: reputational risk, brand tarnishment. I don't know that I need. Why would I call the federal government? This was a house purchase in, whatever state or county, but there's still a large portion that goes unreported. However, 78% is much better than what it was 5 years ago. So I think there's been more awareness. Quickly, the report shows a full run out of each state. States most often to educate their consumers from the start as reported by consumers. You can see Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Massachusetts. There's no regional pocket here. Maybe other than the South is doing a little better job than the Northwest or kind of the Midwest. Least often are the southern states and pockets of the northern Midwest states. Again, this is on the opinion of the consumers. States where the consumers, were going to get into this, were asked, look at the question: would you pay more to work with a real estate business or advisor if they prioritized your security from wire fraud? Well, it's like any multiple choice. The answer just seems like it should be yes, right? Like with everything else going on, it's like, I need to answer yes to this. But where they asked that from and how it was reported, again, not a huge common denominator. The highest incidence of folks falling victim, unfortunately, Michigan, where I am, is one of those, but you can see very much Eastern Seaboard dependent right now. I would argue that Michigan's here because there is a huge nexus between Michigan and Florida. We call them our snowbirds. So I would agree. I would argue that Florida probably just tucked Michigan into those loss incidents. Matt, I know I went through those fairly quickly. Any big standouts there?
No, I mean, I think it largely just shows that, one, the interesting thing is in order to sell the idea of you need more security, it's selling the idea that there's a massive problem. So I suspect more people, once they understand, one, it's the largest transaction they're ever going to have, and two, you're probably the most likely to be victimized as far as like a white collar fraud in this transaction than anything else. That's obviously going to drive the security piece. And then the regional, I was thinking the same thing, as South Carolina is probably the same sort of piece as, Massachusetts, New York. A lot of places also, you just wonder, digging into the numbers, how many of them are virtual closings, how many are attorney states, how many, there's probably a lot of other things. But it goes to the complicated nature for unsophisticated buyers like myself. In this transaction, say that attack surface is wide, so therefore you can sort of get hit across any different channels.
Except for Michigan, nearly all of these are attorney states. And I think that's interesting. And you had mentioned how many folks are involved in the transaction. You add an attorney state and you have, again, not only one more party, but a party that is critical to the sharing of information and possibly the movement or approval of movement of funds into each account. So you're right, as we look at this, maybe part of that is a centralization that, the West Coast is escrow driven, the East Coast is attorney driven. It just has been by nature. Maybe there's something there. This was probably the most significant stat for me, and that was this idea that first-time home buyers were 3 times more likely to fall victim to a transaction. Matt, you recently went through a process. When you saw this, what were your impressions?
That it made total sense because of the stressful nature of buying a home. And so I recently purchased a home, and it's probably like the 6th or 7th home I've purchased. And again, even for me, I think I could probably relate to almost every buyer. there is a lot that is thrown at you. I have to get W-2s, and I got to get my tax returns going back 2 years, and I need to get all of my statements, and I need to claw as much money together across all my different bank accounts, and I got to worry about my interest rate, and I got to worry about whether or not it's a 30-year fixed, 5, 7, 9, whatever year ARM. Most people, especially first-time home buyers, don't even really know what that means. The first-time home buyers also are probably concerned about their credit score, and they're concerned about all of those other things. They're not thinking that some cyber-enabled fraudster is just waiting to pounce. It's just literally a sideswipe, because you become so tunnel vision, because they send so much information that you have to provide. And I understand why, but it's just overwhelming. And if this is the first time you've been through it, you're not thinking anything else other than, I have specific deadlines that I have to meet. I have specific sort of like deliverables I have to provide, and I'm not even thinking about the communications.
I 100% agree with you. I think it's also an interesting framework on how information and activity flows, because by definition, it's all reactionary. Hey, I need a bank statement. Buyer sends a bank statement. I need tax returns. Buyer sends a tax return. So it's almost like, if they're not raising their hand saying anything else I should be aware of, because they're absolutely inundated with all these requests. And if it's not requested and it's not kind of served to them, the natural rhythm of the transaction would it just feels normal, right? It's almost like a wait and see, wait and hear, wait for another request. I completely agree with you. There's so much fatigue by the time they get to the closing table that it's like, look, if I get an email that says send a wire, but I was planning on going to the bank and getting a check today, I'm just going to send the wire. And we'll get into the AI enablement of social engineering in a minute, but they're even making that more believable and timely. So if anything, for those of you that are representing those of you that have interaction with first-time home buyers, this is one where we really do need to level up. The other thing is, we don't talk much about this, is the impact of first-time home buyers when they in particular are defrauded, because it can completely kick them out of an opportunity to purchase a home. Like, they've saved up for years. This is it. It's like a moonshot. Like, we have to close. I even have gift letters and contributions from family, and to have my down payment, which is on average, $80,000 now, gone. That was everything, right? That was absolutely everything. So particular attention to them. Experience does impact customer views on who should be responsible. Not necessarily statistically that big of a deal, but first-time home buyers, for you real estate agents, I just want to focus one little thing here. Real estate agents, look at the difference between those that are going through the process the first time versus multiple times. It flips. Title and settlement, for those that are experienced buyers and sellers, is kind of in first chair. But for those that are going through it the first time, the real estate agent has an outsized relational value, an outsized level of reliance. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that this is data that says deliver against that, or else they could fall victim. They're not thinking about the title company necessarily. It shows also who they go for to help. So again, your first timers, title company, real estate agent, more experienced, they go directly to the source, and that's the bank. And that is critical time and hours that could be spent. Couple more graphs here. Consumer awareness varies a bit based on age. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Most of them fashion themselves as, somewhat aware or very aware. I would say that our retired, approaching senior segment, did a little better than the early, Gen. I'm Gen X now, so. But I want to look at these next two graphs. This one in particular, and what the expectations are relative to age group, and it's similar to the other graph. But I think what's interesting about this is the 65 and older segment, those that have been through the buying and selling motion several different times, I think have a more realistic view of who should be responsible for protecting them. Where the first-time home buyers, the average first-time home buyer age right now is 38, by the way. So if you're buying in sub 34, you're certainly ahead of the generational segment. But title and settlement, again, far outweighing the others. Matt, what did you think when your opinions on this when you first saw this graph?
So a couple things. The first is the law enforcement piece. So people assume law enforcement's there to protect you. Yes. However, when it comes to wire fraud, any white collar fraud, it's different because law enforcement only gets involved after a crime was committed. You have to have probable cause or reasonable suspicion that a crime was committed. It's not proactive. Law enforcement isn't protecting anybody from real estate, wire fraud, or any other business email compromise sort of vertical. They're reactionary because that's what their role is. It's, you've been defrauded, we will investigate, try to reclaim the money through asset forfeiture or through some hold harmless agreements. But that is secondary to trying to identify who the bad actors are and arrest them. And in many instances, those bad actors are overseas and the likelihood of an arrest is very low. So I think that law enforcement on this slide should be zero because they're not protecting you from real estate fraud and they never will because that's not their role. The other piece too, I think that people need to sort of think about when it comes to banks in real estate BECs or in many other sort of BECs, the banks are not getting hacked. The bad actors are not stealing username password combinations to get into the bank to induce the wire transfer. The consumer's doing it themselves. And in many instances, depending on the type of account you have, depending on the type of bank that you have, you don't have a lot of protections there either because the bank's just going to say, I'm sorry, Mr. O'Neill, you logged in, you sent the money. How am I supposed to protect you? I'm Bank X. I don't know where this is your money. You have to be responsible for where the money goes. So that's where when you look at this from sort of like an objective view, the title company and the attorney piece should probably be, in my view, down by that 58 to 80% range. The others have some role to play, very small. Maybe even law enforcement would be outreach, engagements like this, things like that. But it's really going to be that sort of middle block, and it probably is agent experience where that sort of grouping of respondents came up with the conclusion that it is overwhelmingly on title companies and attorneys to actually protect from real estate wire fraud.
Yeah, I mean, because after all, they're asking for the money. They're serving as the escrow agent. They're serving in that fiduciary capacity. Across the board, the question was, does security matter enough to pay a little bit more for it? Statistically, you can kind of see the tech native generation a little more security forward than maybe what the baby boomer or early X. But statistically, everybody's saying yes. Vast majority saying that's probably a good idea. 79% saying I'd pay a little bit more. And I'm not suggesting closing fees go up. I'm not suggesting there's a new line item. But I'm also not suggesting that. I don't know, right? Some states are constrained. I have a strong opinion on the fact that this is a consumer issue. I believe it's a state issue to solve. And I'm advocating and working with several states on what does that narrative look like. We talked about a disclosure. Matt, would it be the end of the world if states required multi-factor authentication on any communication channel that involved the buying or selling of real estate? I don't think so. There's just some common sense things that if you codified it and gave people an amnesty period and said, okay, this goes into effect, and if you don't have that turned on and it turns out that your email was compromised, strap in. It should have an outsized effect. I mean, that's just negligence at its core in a digital age. The client isn't asking for email. The professionals are setting up the rules of the game, right? And we've got to do a better job of making sure we're protecting them in the process. So, all right, I'll get off my stump. This is about the report, not public policy.
Right, and multi-factor authentication is the baseline. It's not
Baseline.
we do MFA
Right.
and now we're good to go. That's that you should be doing that. Like that should be the baseline of a requirement.
Yeah. Yep. Pretty even. Who do you think should be responsible for protecting you again around security? By the numbers, so we have our fraud recovery services division. This is what we saw last year. The median loss for a buyer was just under 70,000, and that made up about 30% of our cases. The median loss for a seller was 172. There's trillions of, we're sitting on more equity in this country than we have ever sat on right now, especially with the deferral of the refinance, and there's just a lot of equity locked into homes right now. But for title company and escrow company and closing attorney providers, the real size is the mortgage payoff. And you think, man, how is this still going on? It's going on in spades. Half of everything coming through fraud recovery services is mortgage payoff related. The timing, the sophistication, and this is one where they find a loophole, they will triple down on mortgage payoffs. You're calling on one. If you learn that you have a mortgage payoff fraud in your pipeline, you need to go back a full 90 days and do an audit and make sure everything was paid off. And chances are, unfortunately, you'll find other instances where either there was an attempt or money didn't land. All right, we benefit from AI. I am not being deep faked, nor is Matt right now, although we'll be talking more about that probably next year with technology. But it is becoming a truly tech and AI enabled scam network, right, Matt? And as we go through these, what I'm seeing is generative AI being used to efficiently and more accurately, when I say accurately, without detection, craft emails that are either starting the conversation or the strike email to solicit funds. And now they're using generative voice AI to kind of precede that email, where you can take someone's voice, 10 seconds of someone's voice, maybe 5, put it into a filter, make it sound like that person, generate what you want it to say, send it directly to a voicemail, and even mimic the phone number where you want it to call from. So, Matt, I could call you, hey, I just got a voicemail from Tom. That's weird, we're on this webinar. Well, he's asking me to look at this email about the closing on Friday, and it has something to do with a wire, and he already looked and called the title company, and the wiring instructions are good, and I guess I need to send money now. So we can't even trust voicemails that are relating to wire transfer payments or voicemails directing us to other forms of communication that then lead to a conversation about wire transfer payments. So, all right, Matt, what do you think about, what are you seeing here on how AI is intersecting social engineering and real estate, wire fraud in particular?
Yeah, it continues to lower the barrier to entry. And number one barrier to entry being you don't have to be a sophisticated fraudster to use sophisticated technology like this. And it's largely free or really inexpensive. So when you think about how businesses are using Gen AI and other sort of AI sort of adjacent tools along with machine learning to scale up their businesses, note, and it's been said over and over again from various reports from the UN and Europol and others, bad actors invest in new technology. So if they stole $172,000, there's a piece of that goes back in R&D because their business is stealing money. And so the concern is that in many instances, fraud is on the forefront of new technology and they become early adopters for a variety of reasons. One, because they can scale. Two, that generally it creates an additional opportunity for success, because thinking even just the basic Gen AI, I'm sure I'm not alone that a lot of people use Gen AI even to just rewrite emails. right? And so the old, oh well, look for misspellings and stuff like that. Like only the worst of fraudsters are now having misspellings and obvious like sort of structural problems with their emails. The other piece that I think people need to understand is as we start talking and getting more and more people to understand emails are a real problem, so are text messages. Mm-hmm. So SMS smishing is a problem. And so if you're a realtor or you're in this process and you think, well, man, I got all these controls in place, I'm just going to send links via SMS. That is also something that you're going to see. And there's drive-by malwares that basically will convince somebody to click on something. It's really getting that first initial action to start. And bad guys are innovators. It's just the way the world works. Bad guys do stuff, law enforcement and us react. That's always the cat and mouse. And now the cat and mouse thing is like, this is Tom and Jerry on steroids because they can use Gen AI and just really start pounding the attacks.
Yep, I completely agree. There was a phenomenon on credential stuffing that's been going on for several decades now. Now what we're seeing in this graph shows is essentially stuffing for wire fraud opportunities. So here's a graph, and it kind of shows some telemetry on what Certified picked up as a bad actor using a Gmail account, a phone number, and an AOL account across multiple different transactions in multiple different regions for multiple different forms of transfer of money. That's what's interesting. This wasn't just I'm targeting buyers across the country. I'm targeting mortgage payoffs. It was everything. And you can see here where, again, this was a single email, a single phone number, and another single email. So 2 emails and a phone number. And it was causing havoc. And what Certified now has the ability to do is say, hey, we've seen this phone number before, this Gmail or this AOL or this email account we've seen on an overseas location or whatever it happens to be. So know that from our trust and safety division at Certified, we're working also around the clock to create this level of like metadata security that is unique to Certified, that's unique to somebody that just doesn't have this level of technology to keep you safe. When you see this, I mean, I know you're not surprised, Matt, because they work at scale, but anything stand out on this?
No, it just continues to highlight the fact that bad actors that are involved in this space are involved in a whole bunch. They're just not doing real estate BECs. So they do a whole bunch of other sort of bad guy stuff, stealing. And that's the one piece. And then the second piece is the ability to get down to that metadata is critically important, and people need to understand that's actually how law enforcement succeeds as well. Mm-hmm. So from the law enforcement perspective, getting that type of granular data is critically important to building up and essentially disrupting and dismantling these networks.
Let's pivot to where we go from here, 2025, Matt. Now, this is the list. We don't need to read the list. If there's one thing that you're speaking to a title company, an escrow company, you're speaking to a mortgage lender, you're speaking to a real estate professional, what will have the most impact, in your opinion, in 2025 to prevent everything that we just talked about?
So the training on the folks on the business side of the house, well, even more so than the consumers, because the consumers are going to be reliant on, as you mentioned earlier, how the communication channels come from the real estate, the title companies, the attorneys. And so educating the masses, think about all of the sort of education that goes into trying to teach consumers. Many consumers believe that they're already trained and already are aware of scams. So really focusing on the sort of the business side of the transaction and focusing all of the sort of education and training on that side, and hopefully implementing technology and realizing that training and awareness isn't enough. You're going to have to, again, bad guys are using technology. We need to use technology, and there's no way around it. It's the old saying, to it takes a network to defeat a network. These are networks of fraudsters, and there's going to have to be a network on the good guys side as well. And also, bad guys are adopting and leveraging new technology. We need to do the same thing if you want to compete.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It starts with our own education. It starts with our own level of security, and we need to eat the dog food that we're trying to pass on here. And yeah, there could be friction. It might be a little slower to get into an email account or into an app because you have multi-factor, or you're using an authentication app or something similar. That's completely fine. And I think the takeaway is not only is there an expectation that you're keeping them secure, but that you'll do something to protect them from wire fraud. And I think you're right. It starts with us, and then we can go out to our communities. As far as technology, identity verification is going to be the new battleground, because all the things that you were just speaking to, Matt, about Gen AI and where they're going, the ability to spin up and present a driver's license or a passport that'll pass a scanner. I mean, that was like 3 years ago, or in your world, probably 20 years ago stuff, right? We're just seeing it more and more on the real estate side. But that technology implementation, I think, is absolutely huge. Know that we're leveling up, especially on the education and how our customers at Certified are able to go into market, take this leadership position through education, through awareness, through collateral, and start building that bridge to the consumer and to their referral partner. When you talk about tech with tech or network versus network, we're doing a great job at Certified. I'm proud of these numbers. Just under 1 million transactions protected last year. When you think about a year where we did, 3.6 million existing home units, right? That's great conversion in the real estate sector. 65 out of 100 of our customers had at least one high-risk transaction identified as actual or suspected fraud. And our system prevented 1.32 billion last year alone. And these were either actual or incredibly high-risk markers that we shut down in real time and went back to our consumers for. So a little bit of a report card for Certified. And our work's not done yet. We'll continue to scale and kind of build this out. All right, Matt, I can't thank you enough. Your insights, I mean, I know you're living and breathing this. Any parting thoughts for our viewers?
It's just more that hopefully the stark reality of the losses will sort of get folks to understand that this is there's generational wealth leaving this country going to transnational organized criminal groups that are responsible for these things, and we collectively need to do a lot better across law enforcement, across every sort of sector, and if we're going to see any changes in the future, positive changes.
No, I completely agree. Well, with that, I'll sign off on this month's To Catch a Fraudster, Matt. Appreciate the friendship. I know I'm going to see you on the circuit here soon, and I look forward to seeing you in person. Thanks for all that you continue to do to keep us safe and keep us in tune with the ever-changing threat. So with that, we'll sign off, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.